What would you do if the only food left in your house was on the fire and a stranger appeared at your gate? In Ikeji, Arakiji, there lived a farmer named Kofi. Kofi was not a rich man. He was not a poor man either. Also, people said. He had a small piece of land behind his mud house. He had strong hands. He had a wife named Abina who could cook a pot of stew that made your eyes close with happiness. And he had a daughter named Amma who was 7 years old and whose laughter sounded like water falling over smooth rocks. Kofi was known in the village for one thing above all else, his open hand. If a neighbor needed yams for a funeral, Kofi gave. If a passing traveler needed a place to rest, Kofi's mat was on the floor before the man could even say thank you. Abina would sometimes shake her head and say, "Kofi, you cannot feed the whole world." And Kofi would smile and say, "I cannot, but I can feed the person in front of me." The village elders liked Kofi. The children liked Kofi. Even the dogs near his compound were fat and happy because Kofi always had a bone to spare, but not everyone was pleased with him. His neighbor, a man named Asante, watched Kofi with narrow eyes. Asante had more land than Kofi. He had more grain stored in his barn. He had 3 strong sons who worked the field, but Asante kept everything for himself. He counted his yams at night. He locked his barn with 2 padlocks. When strangers passed his gate, he looked the other way. "That man Kofi is a fool," Asante would mutter to his wife. "He gives and gives. One day he will have nothing left, and then who will feed him?" His wife never answered. She had stopped answering Asante about Kofi a long time ago. Then came the year that broke everyone's heart. The rains did not come as they should have. They came late, and when they came, they left too quickly. The river shrank, the cassava plants turned yellow before their time, the yams in the ground came out small and sad, like children who had not been given enough to eat. The mango trees did not flower, the groundnuts did not fail. Ikeji Arakiji was hungry. Kofi's harvest that year was very small, 3 small baskets of yams, a little dried fish, some groundnut paste that Abina kept in a clay pot near the window. They had a small pot of grain, maybe enough for 2 weeks, maybe 3 if they were careful. Kofi looked at what he had, then he looked at his wife and his daughter, then he looked at the sky. "We will manage," he said. "We will manage," Abina agreed, though her heart was tight with worry. They began to eat carefully. 1 meal in the morning, 1 meal at night, no wasting, no throwing away. Amma, who was a smart child, did not complain. She ate what was given to her and went to sleep without asking for more. But sometimes at night, Kofi could hear a small stomach making sounds, and it hurt him in a place no medicine could reach. Other families in Ikeji Arakiji were suffering too. Old Mama Efua down the road had nothing but leaves to boil. The young man Kweku, who had just married and had no land of his own yet, was surviving on 1 small meal a day. The widow Adwa, who had 5 children, was feeding them water with a little salt and calling it soup. Kofi saw all of this, and every day, seeing it was like a stone pressing on his chest. It was on the 7th day of the hungry season when the stranger arrived. He came from the direction of the eastern road, which was the road that led to nowhere nearby. Just more bush, more emptiness, and eventually a distant town that most people in Ikeji Arakiji had never visited. He was an old man, very old. His back was bent like a tree that has carried too much wind. His clothes were the color of dust. His feet were bare, and they were cracked and dry from long walking. He carried a small bag over one shoulder, and in his hand was a walking stick made from a branch that still had bark on it. He stopped at Kofi's gate. "Please," the old man said. His voice was dry, like leaves in the dry season. "I have been walking since yesterday morning. I have nothing to eat. Can anyone help me?" Now, Kofi was sitting outside, mending a fishing net. He heard the old man. He looked up. He saw the old man's sunken cheeks and his tired eyes. He saw the way the old man's hands trembled slightly as he held his walking stick. Kofi stood up. Inside the house, on the fire, was the last pot of stew that Abina had made that morning. It was enough for 3, for Kofi, Abina, and Amma. It was the last of the dried fish, the last of the groundnut paste. After this, there was only the grain, and the grain would need to last them many more days. Kofi walked inside. He stood before the pot. He looked at it for a long time. Abina came and stood beside him. She looked at the pot. She looked at her husband. She did not speak. Kofi said quietly, "There is a man at the gate. He is old. He has not eaten since yesterday." Abina said nothing for a moment. Then she went to the shelf and brought down 4 bowls instead of 3. That was his wife. That was Abina. Kofi went out and brought the old man inside. They washed his feet with water from a clay pot. They gave him a place to sit, the good chair, the one with the woven back. Amma brought him water to drink, both hands around the cup the way a child is taught to offer things to elders. Then Abina served the stew. She gave the old man the largest portion. She gave Amma the next. She and Kofi shared the last, splitting what remained between them quietly, without any fuss. The old man ate slowly. He closed his eyes between each bite, as if he was praying or dreaming. When he was done, he looked up at Kofi, and something in his eyes had changed. They no longer looked tired. They looked bright, like 2 small fires had been lit behind them. "You have given me your last meal," the old man said. It was not a question. Kofi shook his head. "I have given you a meal. There is always something remaining when you give from the heart." The old man smiled. It was a slow smile, but it spread across his whole face like sunrise. "I have walked through 40 villages," the old man said, "in this season of hunger. In 39 of those villages, gates were closed to me. People said they had nothing. Some had nothing, yes, but some had much, and still they closed their gates. You are the first house, the first man who opened his door. You were hungry," Kofi said simply. "My door is for people who are hungry." The old man slept that night on Kofi's mat. In the morning, when Kofi woke before the sun, he came outside and found the old man already awake, sitting in the compound, looking at the sky. They sat together for a while without speaking. The birds began to call. The sky began to change from black to deep blue, to something between purple and orange. Then the old man spoke. "Kofi," he said, "I'm going to tell you something, and you must not be afraid, and you must not doubt. Will you hear me?" "I will hear you," Kofi said. "Go to your field today. Dig where the old acacia tree used to stand. You know the one that fell 3 rains ago?" "I know it," Kofi said slowly. "Dig there. What you find, keep only what your family needs for the season. The rest, you must share with the village, all of it. Do not be afraid that there will not be enough. There will always be enough when you give the way you give." Then the old man reached into his small bag and pulled out 3 seeds. They were large, round, smooth, not like any seed Kofi had seen before. They shone faintly, like they had been polished. "Plant these by your front door. Water them each morning with the first water you draw. Do not miss a single day." Kofi took the seeds. They were warm in his palm, warmer than they should have been. When he looked up, the old man was walking toward the gate. He moved differently now. His back was straight, his steps were light. The cracked feet were still cracked, the old clothes still old, but he walked like a man who carried no burden at all. "Wait," Kofi called. "What is your name? Where do you come from?" The old man turned and smiled that slow, sunrise smile again. "I am just a hungry old man," he said, "and you are just a man with an open hand. That is enough." He walked away down the eastern road. Kofi watched until the old man was gone, until the road was empty and still again. A bird called from somewhere in the bush. The sun rose fully, warm and cold. Kofi stood there a moment longer. Then he went to get his digging hoe. Kofi dug where the old acacia had stood. The ground there was hard from the dry season, and he walked through the morning, sweating, stopping to drink water. Abina watched from a distance, saying nothing. Amma sat nearby, drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. At midday, when the sun was directly above and the sweat was dripping from Kofi's chin to the earth, His owl hit something, something hard, something that ran faintly when the metal struck it. He dug around it with his hands. It was a clay pot, sealed with a flat stone and dried mud buried deep. It was heavy, very heavy. When he broke it open, he sat back and stared. Inside were yams, but not ordinary yams. They were large, perfect, dense, and dry, stored long ago by someone that had known how to keep them. There were also dried beans, dried corn, and dried fish wrapped in leaves that had somehow stayed whole. And beneath all of it, wrapped in old cloth, were cowrie shells, the kind that used to be used for trading, worth a great deal to the right people. Kofi sat beside the open pot and looked at what he had found. He thought about the old man's words. He thought about Abina and Amma. He thought about old Mama Efua with only leaves to boil, about young Kweku and his new wife, about widow Adwa and her 5 children. He thought for only a short while. Then he got up and called Abina. They worked together the rest of that day. They carried food to every house in Ikeji Arakiji that was suffering. And in that season, that was almost every house. They gave yams to Mama Efua. They gave dried fish to Kweku. They gave corn to the widow Adwa. They gave beans to the family by the river. They went door to door, carrying baskets. And wherever they went, people opened their doors in disbelief. Where did this come from? People asked. From the ground, Kofi said. And before that, from an old man. And before that, from God. By evening, Kofi and Abina had kept only what they needed for their own family through the season. Not more, not less. What remained of the cowrie shells, Kofi gave to the village elder to use for the common good. That night, Ikeji Arakiji ate. For the first time in many days, the whole village ate. The next morning, Kofi planted the 3 seeds by his front door, just as the old man had said. He pushed each one into the soft earth with his thumb, pressed the soil down gently, and poured water over them from the first drawing of the morning. Nothing happened on the first day, or the second, or the third. Amma checked every morning. Baba, nothing is growing. Then we water again and wait, Kofi said. On the 5th morning, Amma came running inside before Kofi was even fully awake, her feet slapping the floor. Baba, Baba, come and see. Kofi came outside. 3 small shoots had pushed up through the earth, green, strong, upright, reaching already toward the sky with the confidence that made you smile. The plants grew fast, faster than any plant Kofi had seen. Within days, they were knee-high. Within a week, they were waist-high. They had wide, dark leaves and thick stalks. And then, one morning, when the early light came slanting across the compound, Kofi saw that the plants had flowered. 3 flowers, each one a different color. One yellow, like the sun. One deep red, like the earth. One white, like clouds after rain. People began to stop at Kofi's gate just to look at the plants. No one had seen anything like them. The flowers gave off a soft, warm smell. Not too strong, not too sweet, but the kind of smell that made you feel, without knowing why, that everything was going to be fine. When the rains finally came in full, late, but they came, the plants bore fruit, round, smooth fruit, each one as large as a man's fist. The yellow-flowered plant bore fruit that, when you bit into it, tasted like the best version of whatever you were most hungry for. The red-flowered plant bore fruit that healed small sicknesses, a child's fever, an old woman's cough. The white-flowered plant bore seeds, and those seeds planted anywhere grew quickly and fared well. Kofi shared the seeds with the whole village as he shared everything. Within one season, every compound in Ikeji Arakiji had those plants growing by their door. Now we must speak of Asante, the neighbor, because a story without shadow has no shape. Asante had watched all of this with his narrow eyes. He had seen the pot that came from the ground. He had seen the strange plants. He had seen Ikeji Arakiji eating wali with all his stored grain and his locked barn, and his 3 strong sons had given nothing and received nothing from the miracle. One night, Asante's wife whispered to him, "Husband, do you not see what is happening? Kofi shared what little he had. He shared with the stranger, and look what has come to him. Lucky, Asante muttered. Just lucky. Is it luck? His wife asked softly. Or is it something else? Asante said nothing, but that night he did not sleep well. He turned on his mat, and in his mind he saw his locked barn, his counted yams, his heavy padlocks, and beside that, in his mind, he saw Kofi's face, not angry, not proud, just open, just a man with an open hand. In the morning, Asante unlocked his barn. He walked to the house of old Mama Efua and brought her a basket of yams. He walked to Widow Adwa and brought her a bag of grain. He did it quietly, without telling anyone, without making a speech. It was not easy for him. His hands held the food tightly before he let it go, but he let it go. When he walked home, his 3 sons were waiting at the gate. They had seen what their father had done. The eldest son looked at Asante with different eyes, with a kind of love and respect that had not been there before. He put his hand on his father's shoulder and said nothing. He did not need to say anything. Asante stood in his compound and felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been locked far longer than his barn. He went inside and sat down, and when his wife put food before him, it tasted better than it ever had.